Okay. Yeah, backwards, right? This is one of those classic Yardley scenes, and if you look very carefully, you'll see that there's ice on the lake, just a tiny bit, unlike now. Okay. We'll start with an aerial view of Yardley Borough. You can, here is Main Street. Can you see that? Main Street, that's better. All right. Lake Afton, West Afton Avenue, East Afton Avenue down to the river. And then running between the two, you have the Delaware Canal. We're going to start this tour on the south end of the borough with the Yardley train station. Um, the railroad came through Yardley in 1876, just in time to carry passengers from New York City to Philadelphia for the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition.
Mm.
1876 was really the start of a golden age for Yardley. A lot going on. This particular photo of the train station was taken in 1940. As you can see, we had a real train station, a Victorian style board and batten station. We had a Victorian style waiting booth, and across the tracks, a freight house. Okay. Um, this is a 1990 shot of the train station. And in this presentation, we'll be showing photos mostly taken in the beginning of the 1900s with 1990 photographs thrown in and then more current photographs. Um, the photographs that you're seeing are taken from the collections of the Yardley Historical Association that are housed within the old library by Lake Afton. Ah, dull. Okay. And here's the train station today with a much longer platform on the north side and no platform at all on the south side. And again, a reminder for people to mute, please. There was a trolley that ran through Yardley, beginning essentially 1900 and ran up until about 1930. Um, the trolley connected Yardley with Morrisville and Trenton to New Hope and to Newtown. And up here you'll see the freight station that we saw in an earlier photograph. This is essentially that shot taken last year. There wasn't a tunnel when the other shot was taken. Hmm. Now we're going to head north on Main Street. On South Main Street, close to the train station, large, rather grand Victorian houses were built, all in the optimism of what the railroad was bringing to Yardley. And today, those houses are still there. And I think some of those trees are still there. But unfortunately, in this photo, you have more leaves. Going down the street a little more, you have the intersection of South Main Street and Letchworth Avenue. We don't have an earlier photograph of this building, but there was a store there, Mrs. Delvecchio's store. And Giorgio's was there in 1990. And I sort of forget what Giorgio's was. And today it's used as an office building and a rental unit. Okay. Um, I'm sorry. For whatever reason, I have not found the button to mute all, so I really do have to ask you all to please mute. Sorry to nag about it. On the second block of South Main Street was St. Ignatius Church. Bet some of you didn't know that. In 1966, it was demolished and the new church was built up in Lower Makefield Township. And today, there's a house on the lot. And across the street, when it was the Catholic Church, it was a parking lot for the church, and now the Yardley Fire Company has its firehouse there. Okay. On the northeast corner of South Main Street and College Avenue, you had a large, lovely Victorian building. And a special note, first, it was taken after some kind of big windstorm. And secondly, the house has a turret. 1990, the turret's gone. And in 2024, the turret's gone. It's gained a canopy, and it's now the Rosa Bianca restaurant. Across the street, you have what was the Yardley Friends Meeting House on the corner of College and South Main. In 1869, the number of Quakers in Yardley had grown to a sizable enough that they could build their own meeting house. Before that, they went either to Falsington Friends or to Makefield Friends. And they built what was very fashionable at the time, a stucco over stone structure. And Yardley was the first meeting in Bucks County that didn't separate men from the women. About in the 1950s, the meeting house was bought, and Yardley Savings and Loan occupied it for years. Yardley Savings and Loan took off the stucco and revealed the fact that the stone of which it was built was taken from the Twining Quarry directly in back of the building, and they the Twinings gave the meeting the stone because essentially it was discard stone, very, very little stones. And if you look at it today, you go like, wow, there really are a lot of little stones. Well, that's because they were for free and didn't come far. And today, the building is occupied by a financial firm. The last bank there was Santander, and it still has all that little stone. Farther north on Main Street, you have the Yardley Community Center. The back of the building was actually built first in 1851 by the Sons of Temperance. Yardley Borough was very big into temperance. Then the front of the building, which is what you're seeing here, was built in 1878 by the Oddfellows. Again, you're seeing that 1878 um, time frame coming into being. So Yardley was big enough, prosperous enough to have a building for entertainment. Okay. The building had various uses over time. It was a school. Um, it was the Cobweb Theater. This iteration is the Yardley Theater. Um, Kids went there to dances. There were movies there, all sorts of things. And here's a picture of one of the productions inside of the community center. And I'm hoping that the girl in the middle with the braids doesn't have a unicorn horn in the middle of her head. That's actually some kind of greenery that is misplaced. Sorry, keep doing it. Okay. Then in 1941, the building was purchased by the Yardley Community Center Corporation. And here's the community center today. So in essence, you still have the lovely window and a little bit of Victorian decoration. Yardley Borough Hall was built in 1916 and on a site where there was a house called the Wheat Sheaf because of its wonderful cast iron railings. Yardley Borough Hall was occupied by Borough Council and Yardley Fire Company number one. And you see the firemen out front. You'll notice that to the left, you have garage doors that opened out, and the post office occupied the south side of the building. Oh, I'm sorry, I keep hitting that button for some dumb reason. Here's Yardley Borough Hall today. The fire company moved out in 1972, and this side of the building was renovated. The garage doors were taken off and windows replaced, but the post office is still there, and Borough Council still meets on the top floor. All right. Okay, 40 South Main Street. Many of you who have lived here in Yardley might recognize the building as Harriet's. Harriet Miller sold fabric and she was an interior designer. And today, that little building is the Wawa Annex. Wawa took it over, and it's essentially a space for employees, and I believe the restrooms are in there too. Right next door was, you see this building here? That's the building you were just looking at, Harriet's Wawa Annex. And that was the shop of Arthur Blaker, who um, again did painting and interior decoration. And this was the Blaker home. They moved to Lower Makefield in 1946. And in its place today, you have the little strip shopping center. So what was essentially a strip of homes is now a strip shopping center, the Wawa and Borough Hall. On the other side of the street, you had the Girton Butcher Shop. The Girtons were very influential in town. They were stalwart Methodist and leaders in the Methodist Church. The Little Girton Butcher Shop in the 1990s was the Bucks County Nut Company. And I can attest they had truly superb nuts, really good. And today, the building is La La Lobster. Now here's a big change. On the west side of South Main Street was the Yardley Methodist Church. Okay. And watch for this building in the upcoming slides. The Methodist Church sold the property, and in its place was built the Yardley Shopping Center. And the stone building is still in place. Today it actually has an addition. And here's the Yardley Shopping Center at not quite the same angle. But in 1990, there was a phone booth, which shows its era a little bit. Yardley did have the Yardley National Bank. It was started around 1900 as a single structure. It was added on to later. The Yardley National Bank unfortunately went out of business during the Depression. But the building itself continued to be used for banking purposes. Um, the Philadelphia National Bank was there quite a few years, but there were a lot of other different banks going through too. Today, the building is the Vault Brewing Company. Wonder how they got that name. And the bank vault is indeed still in the building, and they found a lot of interesting artifacts in the vault, including papers from the early 1900s where the bank had to report daily to the Federal Reserve in Philadelphia, um, bringing their accounts right down to the penny. And if they were one off, they had to resubmit. And here is the Main and Afton intersection. And you can tell this is a postcard because it has printing on it, and you can tell that the trolley was still running because the trolley tracks were running right up through the middle of town. Um, a
Oh, I didn't
feature,
know.
a feature that I I don't quite understand, but this is a corner entrance on the original building. A lovely Queen Anne, um, Second Empire combination Victorian building. But the corner entrance, you go up 3 steps. Okay. And here you have a current day picture of the building, and it's on ground level. But this is a 1905 or so picture of the same building. Okay. Going up the steps, and it was the Purcell and Black General Store. And on the first floor, you had essentially your groceries, etc. On the second floor, there were dry goods. And as you can see, a very, very ornate building.
I'll tell you what happened there. That's where the entrance was when I remember it, on South Main Street. Afton Avenue runs downhill, which is probably why there was 3 steps on Afton Avenue and level on Main Street.
Okay, thank you. Um, but this is a 1990 picture. This was before the building was be rebuilt and after the 1989 fire, and it's on ground level. So interesting. This building also had a turret, which disappeared rather early on.
That they would have tore it down.
I don't remember anything about a fire then,
89.
87 or 89, but I used to go
89.
down the road.
Okay. Um, okay, so here's the building today, rebuilt. Um, after the
Yeah, it goes
1989,
downhill.
uh, yeah, yes, it does go downhill, but um, and the Yardley Jewelers had the building designed by a Doylestown architect who took a lot of care to try to capture the character of the original building, which had sort of been lost in that Yardley lamp shop Allied office period. The Continental Tavern stands on the northeast corner of North Main and Afton. Okay. And again, a big fire. And now I'm going to forget the date. I'm going to say 1878. And the building, everything behind the building, this barn, or I'm sorry, I am confusing myself here. Okay, Continental Tavern, the original configuration. Behind it was a barn. There was a very large fire, and I'm going to say 1878, because the barber who was occupying a space in the barn burnt too much hair in his stove and caught the barn on fire. In 1990, the Continental Tavern had been recited with aluminum siding. It was rather simple. Okay, okay, I'm sorry. Um, can we all mute except me? Thanks a lot. And I need to find the button. Okay. And here is the Continental Tavern. The current owner, Frank and Patty Lyons, put back the porch, put back the shutters, to make it appear much like the original. And as you notice back here, there are no buildings. That's all parking lot now. Across the street was Whist Corner. It was a confectionery store. It was the telegraph office. At one time, it was a little bit of a dance hall called the Orange Blossom Inn. It was the trolley stop. A lot of things happening at Whist Corner. And as you can see in this picture, it wasn't particularly a prosperous time for the Whists. Okay. In 1990, the building was Hyatt Pharmacy. That's Hyatt Pharmacy. Okay. And today it is Starbucks with much the same configuration as the Hyatt Pharmacy. And that roof that keeps getting taken out by trucks keeps getting replaced. Now, across the street was Beaner's Hardware. This building replaced a general store owned by the Cadwallader family that burnt down in 1901. Yardley had a lot of fires. So after 1901, this more Victorian building was built. You have the round window up top and very, very nice Victorian style windows down here. Beaner's Hardware remained in business until the 1970s. And today it is the Yardley Refillery. Here's a shot looking north at Main and Afton. You can see how the trolley tracks diverge. You have the tracks heading to New Hope. You have the tracks heading to Newtown. And here's that shot today. And I will admit, you'll see another shot here where I was not the bravest of persons and didn't stand out in the middle of the street to take the picture. The Yardley gristmill has a very rich history. The milling operation was originally started in the late 1600s by John Brock. In 1727, it was taken over by Thomas Yardley, the original settler's nephew. And what you're seeing here is a picture of the building after a fire in 1901. Okay, it was only a two-story building until the fire in 1901. And then after that, A.S. Cadwallader put on a third story. And at this point, this was probably taken late 1930s and the 40s when they were no longer milling grain and they were primarily dealing in selling Purina chow of various kinds. And here is how it appears today. And what you see over here is essentially a basin. This part of the parking lot in front of the gristmill was water up until probably the mid 1970s when the owner of the gristmill in Lakeside, sort of in the dark of night, filled it in, paved it over. But this big Lake Afton drains under North Main Street through a pipe under the parking lot, comes out in this basin, and is the water's dumped into Brock Creek. Lakeside was built in 1727 by Thomas Yardley, the nephew. Oh, and I won't give you that whole story because it would be here too long. This is an early 1900s picture. Susan Yardley had married Algernon S. Cadwallader, so the occupation of Lakeside switched from the Yardleys to the Cadwalladers. And the chief thing to look at in this photograph is this really ornate wrought iron fence all along the top. And I think, no, is a wisteria that essentially covered this side of the building. It's winter, so I can't really note it there. Okay. In 1990, here's that wisteria crawling in front of the building. Lakeside itself is distinguished because it has stepped gable ends and it's a stone building painted yellow. And here's Lakeside today. It has a very high hedge, so you really don't see the bottom half of the building. Going up North Main Street, you have the Cold Spring Bleachery, which came to town in 1900 because of Yardley's abundant water supply. This particular photograph was taken for the contractor. It remained in business until the early 1970s, and in its day was Yardley's largest employer. Today on the Cold Spring Bleachery site, you have Yardley Walk, a townhouse development. And this little round landscaped area was where that water tower was. And preserved in the back of the Yardley Walk development are the reservoirs that supplied the bleachery with water. Okay. Um, Going up North Main Street, you have the home of William Yardley, a descendant of the original William Yardley, the settler. Um, William Yardley's wife was Mary Yardley. William died relatively early, and Mary became the inheritor of the Yardley lands on the north side of the borough, including this property, everything across the street, and the land from her house down to the canal and then to the canal from the river. Mary Yardley was entrepreneurial. In about 1910, she sold the land from the canal south to the river to developers from Trenton, who created the Rivermar development of bungalows, and had a development plan for all the land across the street developing into really little tiny lots. And that's the development today that we call Whiskey Hill. Here's a picture taken last year. It was just last year. Okay. The Mary Yardley footbridge connects from that house property down to the Rivermar development. The bridge was put in about 1912 because the developers promised all these people buying properties along the river for their summer homes that they could walk from their homes to the trolley line on North Main Street in 3 minutes. And the only way they could fulfill that promise was to put in a little bridge. And this bridge remained in place until about 1986 when a wooden bridge was put in. And then last year, the wooden bridge was replaced by a fiberglass bridge that editorial comment has, I think, about 1,000 bolts. And here we are at North Main Street and Jerview Drive, looking up the hill into the development that today is known as Whiskey Hill. Along North Main Street, you have these relatively small stone homes that were built primarily for middle management people from General Motors in Trenton. In the Whiskey Hill development, you had the homes of the executives from the Cold Spring Bleachery who were living nearby the factory. And you want to know why it's called Whiskey Hill? Well, not because there were stills, nothing like that. Apparently, the name was given to the neighborhood by the trash guys who picked up a lot of whiskey bottles because they had very good parties in Whiskey Hill. So, and here's a picture taken at that same location today. Now, we have gone 40 minutes. I think we should probably stop here because we have quite a few things left to go, and 40 minutes is usually enough for people with on Zoom, and we'll have another Zoom really soon to do the second half. But I'll give you a little preview. We will be going up and down East Afton Avenue and then hop, skipping, and jumping to other neighborhoods throughout the borough. Okay? Does anyone have any questions? You can feel free to unmute if you do. No questions? This is easy.
The building, let's see, am I still muted?
No.
Okay, the building on the corner of Afton and Main Street that had burned,
Yes.
it was rebuilt as a two-story building, but originally it was a three-story building. And I knew a gentleman when I was a young lad going to Makefield School who had a beauty shop in the third floor.
Oh, okay. I hadn't heard about the beauty shop on the third floor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know how long it was there. You know, as a young boy, I didn't pay much attention to that. I just knew that he was on the third floor. And then the drugstore, Phil was the owner of the drugstore for many years.
Mm-hmm.
Had the lunch counter in there and that
Yeah,
fantastic
we all remember Phil.
magazine rack.
We're going.
And
I'll see you there.
then that's where I started reading car magazines, and that's what I wound up doing for my whole career was publishing automotive magazines. So that's
Oh,
where it started. And
started at the Yardley Pharmacy.
yes, yeah, there's a little part of my heart in that building.
Yeah. And in this presentation, I didn't include that particular building. I need to add that in the future. But the Yardley Pharmacy was originally Yardley Fire Company number 2.
Yes.
Okay, you had number 1 was the first to come into town. And then, as you noticed, many fires, and the 2 fire companies did compete with each other to see who would get to the fire first. And then I guess fire company number 1 bested the competition.
Susan, I have a question about Mary Yardley.
Hmm.
What were the dates for her? Was she in the late 1800s, early 1900s?
She was early 1900s.
Ah,
And I'm not going to recall it off the top of my head. I think she didn't die until the 1940s.
ah.
And
I,
then,
I am a relative newcomer to Yardley. We moved here in 1982. Our house was built by Arthur Blaker.
oh,
Uh,
okay.
but I was out, my husband's from California. His folks lived in Oakland. So my mother-in-law got to know this lovely woman whose first name was Irene, who lived up the hill from her in Oakland. So when we went out to visit my mother-in-law, she took us to meet Irene, and Irene said, "Oh, my husband and I, when we married in 1930, moved into a house on North Main Street in Yardley, in one of those stone houses." And she said every house when it was built had 2 pine trees planted in front of it. And for many years, those pine trees, we knew which house hers was because it still had the pine trees, but they've since been cut down.
Mhm.
So kind of a small world here.
Yeah. And coincidentally, Mary Yardley is buried in California.
Hmm.
So, so you were talking about the little stone houses along with the pine trees, correct?
Yes, on the
Yeah.
on Main,
Yeah,
North.
not the
Yeah,
mansion.
no,
Okay.
the ones that apparently Mary Yardley had built or
No,
sold.
she didn't have those buildings. She sold the land.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Um, the development plan just had 50-foot lots and
Mm,
two more streets that currently more streets than currently exist. She had grand plans.
mm.
Susan,
Okay.
I'm curious to know, there was a building or two buildings really between what was the Yardley Pharmacy and the Beaner's hardware store. There was this small building that I recall at one time was an antique shop. It probably had several iterations as businesses. It was just a tiny structure
Yes,
that and then next to that to the right was Seplo's department store.
Mm-hmm.
Is that building still there? I
Yeah.
don't live in the area anymore. It is.
Yes.
yes.
Yep.
Do you remember what that small building was?
Was
I
it
just,
on the
I just,
west or no, on the south or north side?
it was just to the right of the pharmacy. And in fact, it was just a narrow driveway to get into the pharmacy parking lot.
Correct.
Truly just is it Randy, you remember it?
I do, but I don't remember what it was.
Yeah,
Was an antique store.
it was an antique store for
Hmm.
a long time.
Well, I
Okay.
lived across the street. I lived in the above the lamp shop
Oh,
Okay.
when I first came to Yardley on the second floor, obviously. And the third floor was a ballroom at one time.
oh my.
Not when I lived there, but I mean it had been used as a ballroom at some point earlier in its life. And there had also been a fire in there prior to my living there at some point because the wood up there was all charred on the third floor.
Hmm. Okay. So the little building essentially stood
Between
where the mural is today.
yes,
Okay.
between Seplo's and the pharmacy.
Okay.
It was like a shed almost.
Okay. Because there's a stone barn back there.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, no, it was
Right on the street.
right on the street. It was
Okay.
right on the street and it was like a little cottage.
Hmm.
That's what it reminded me of, a little cottage.
Okay.
There's a
Like-
photo of it in this book on Yardley,
Ah,
published. It's that company that publishes books on towns and
yes, I have
places.
that book.
Actually published, Vince Prophy wrote it
Yeah,
Yes,
for the
yes.
benefit of the Yardley Historical Association.
that's right.
yes. There's a lot of great photos in this
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
Could you add that information in the chat, Randy?
Let's see.
Can you
Okay.
type that in the chat?
And
Yeah.
Susan, somebody in the chat is asking if you can put the web address and or the YouTube address
I'll
for
do
the
that. Yes.
Historical Association before you go.
Thanks.
Okay.
That is a wonderful book.
Yeah. And certainly you can buy it at Commonplace Reader.
Yes, Arcadia Publishing.
Yeah. They have a myriad of books. It's sort
Yeah,
of amazing.
ArcadiaPublishing.com.
And that I'll call it a driveway where the mural is today.
Mhm.
That was owned by T. Sidney Cadwallader.
Yes, it was.
because he took great pains to close it down every X number of years so that he did not lose ownership of it.
Oh,
Yeah. So
he was he was
I have
a
a feeling it must have been in the way or falling down.
mm,
Okay.
The building. You're talking about the building, Sue.
Yeah.
Yes, and,
This
and I
little,
think I think it was removed before I even moved out of that building, so that must have been early 70s sometime that little building was removed.
okay.
I don't know if anybody on here remembers when they tore down the Catholic Church on Main Street, the Catholic Church moved out to Reading Avenue.
Mhm.
yes.
And that property where the Catholic Church is now, there used to be a big farmhouse there with a barn back behind where the current church is now, with a long lane leading to the house. And the people who lived there were the Hawley family, and they were friends of my parents. And they had two daughters. And so Ed Hawley was an antique dealer in New Jersey, and it was a grand old farmhouse. And as kids, we played in it, and the barn as well. And then the railroad tracks were right behind, and it was kind of heartbreaking for me. I went out to California, and when I came back to visit years later, I was so shocked to see the house gone and the barn gone and the church there. It was a big shock. And I
Wow.
heard that the house had burned and was torn down. And the Hawley family moved over to Sutphin Road because he couldn't buy that front piece of the property because the church owned it. And he said someday there's going to be a big church here, and we don't want to live here then when it'll ruin our view of the fields and everything. So that was just one of my early memories of that area. Um, I go back about once a year. I live on Whidbey Island in Washington State, and but big piece of my heart is in Yardley.
Yep.
A lot of people have wonderful memories, and when we do programs like this, we learn more and more. Um, in April, we're going to have a presentation by Doug Schlicker, who lived on North Main Street, who worked for Dr. Mackinson at the kennels.
Oh,
Oh wow. Oh wow.
And he has some stories.
yeah, and Mackinson's was right next to the Hawley's farmhouse.
Oh, okay.
And wasn't there a duck farm out there?
The duck farm was out on Dolington Road,
Yeah, right. Well,
but
wasn't Mackinson's on Dolly?
No,
Reading Avenue, Reading
Reading
Avenue.
That's
Avenue.
right, Reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reading Avenue, and they had a veterinary hospital.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the boarding kennel.
Yes.
And
We lived right across the street, sort of.
and before that, it was a game farm. And
Right.
he bred pheasants and quail, peacocks. But Doug Schlicker particularly remembers the peacocks.
Wow.
It's my sister Kathy that was just talking a moment ago. She's in Colorado and I'm in South Central Pennsylvania. It's nice to see you, Kath.
Hi, I made it.
We grew up on Sandy Run Road right at the end of Reading Avenue, and I used to tramp the woods all the time. And I remember one time coming across all these old cages and things, and sort of Jurassic Park style, if you think about some of it from the movie. And I always wondered what that was. And then I found out later that it was the Mackesons that raised wildlife there. There's a game. Yeah.
Yeah. And apparently there were more than 200 cages.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
There was a lot.
Some of it. And
Mhm.
then I realized I shouldn't be here. Kids will do those things.
Okay.
Yes. Susan,
Yeah.
this is Shirley.
Mhm.
Another owner of that area, at the corner of Lettsworth and South Main, where you showed it was Giorgio's.
Right.
I know it had to be in the 60s and I guess 70s. There was also a store called Cordwell's. because as a
Yeah.
little girl, yep,
Yeah.
that was our
We had
corner
to go
store.
shopping for our
Yeah,
grandparents.
Cordwell's.
Cordwell.
Because
Penny
I'm
candy.
yeah, because I'm down on the other section of South Canal and
Uh-huh.
Lettsworth, and Cordwell's was our store. I remember as a little girl, it had to be in the 60s. It was her husband was a butcher, so it was a full grocery store. He was a butcher. You
That's
get penny candy. So
Mhm.
I learned something too. I didn't know it was called Giorgio's or what that was,
Yeah.
but I do know it was Cordwell stores
Yes.
Yeah.
in the 60s, 70s, at least 60s and the 70s, I think.
Shirley, I'm glad you said that because I couldn't think of the name of it. Thank you. Our grandparents just lived on the other corner,
Right.
Cordwell's, and Grandma would give us money to go get a loaf of bread, and Grandpa would give us money to get him cigarettes. Like you can't do that now either, you know,
Yeah.
back in the day. But Cordwell's, yeah, I couldn't think of the name. Thanks.
Yeah. And then the penny candy was on the other side of the street, attached to the same building Graham lived in.
Well, then after it was that store, then there was like a store in there that had handmade pottery, and that was after it was a butcher shop. But
Okay.
they still had the rack on the back wall with the hooks. Well, I was in there one day buying Christmas presents or one thing or another, but they were going out of business, and they were whoever had that store, and they were selling everything. And I said, well, what about that meat rack? And they said, we're $50. So I came home and got my husband in his pickup truck and his tools, and we went down there, and he took that rack down and brought it home, and it's in my kitchen.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And that store, 166 on the corner there of Letchworth, was a record store.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was my uncle's, our uncle's.
Oh,
Yes.
I bought At the Hop by Danny and the Juniors. There, I still have that record.
Yeah, Uncle John ran that for a little while. Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, small world.
Yeah,
You
there
never
were
really get Yardley out of your system. There's something special about growing up.
That's for sure.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
yeah. So we only
I'm going
came
to
here
sign
in
off. I have a dinner to go to, and I just want to thank you very much for doing this, and nice meeting you all on here. And I look forward to the next episode.
Okay,
Mhm.
I will be sending everyone who signed up for this YouTube the link for the second half. And as you can tell, there are lots more of these presentations that can be done.
Thank you, Susan. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
thank
Yeah.
you
This
all
was
for coming. I put in the website,
Mhm.
I put in the name of the book, and I put in our YouTube channel. On there right now is Yardley History 101. And you can all cross your fingers that I remember how to get this recording. Because I've only done it once before. It didn't necessarily stick. So thank you all for coming. Those of you who live around us, we hope to see you at the old library. There are a lot of good things coming up this year. And for those of you, just keep on sharing those recollections, because that's how history actually gets to be more accurate.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you
That's
very
it.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
you.
Thank you,
Night.
Susan.
Mhm.
This was
Thank you,
wonderful.
Thank you from
Susan.
Kentucky.
Thank you
Hey,
all.
everybody. It was nice to see
Bye.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Night.